team. Welcome to episode 135 of Transition Talk, where we talk about dental transitions and how to navigate the sometimes messy path to practice ownership. In episode 134, we talked about what to do if your price comes in lower than expected in a private practice sale. In this episode, we're going to dive into the DSO and private equity side of things. If your expectations aren't met on the sale, how do you navigate it? Do you accept it, consider a different route? We'll guide you through your options and help set you up for the right mindset to avoid any disappointment. But before we get into that, Mr. Loretto.
Hi, Christy.
Hello, how are you?
I am excellent. I'd like to start us off on that word disappointment.
Oh, I love that word.
Oh, goodness. We're going to start off. I want to explain to our listeners what I call the dummy tax. Now, I learned this term from my good friend Tom Dunn. They're in Colorado. You know, I like to spend my time in Colorado.
Yes.
So my buddy Tom describes this dummy tax as, we came up with this definition, is you've done something dumb and it either cost you over $500 or a bunch of time. And it's just like, why did I do that? And so we both were just laughing and giggling about this dummy taxes that we paid along the years. And so we agreed that we would share our dummy tax stories along the way going forward. So I arrived back home from Colorado, and 24 hours later, I'm involved in a dummy tax. So we all have the smoke detectors, and this is just an amazing thing that God just wants to punish us with. And we live in Texas, so I'm not trying to brag here. I have a big house. It's not like it's an expensive house. It's just a big house. I have 11 smoke detectors, 11. And I've upgraded these smoke detectors to the 10-year program. Mm-hmm. Okay, house was redone. Hey, do you want to upgrade? Yes, let's get these smoke detectors. Boom. And so we're getting the chirp thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I've got appointments coming up. I've got a call. I got this. The dogs are now freaking out. They're going in there. Roxanne and I get into a huge fight. I'm asking for help. She's not as helpful. Christy, I remove all 11. Even though I can tell there is this back bedroom, it's not going off, I want to eliminate. Maybe the noise is secretly going through the attic and coming down into the kitchen. I don't know, but it's driving me crazy, and I want to eliminate all possibilities. So I do this, all 11. I move them into the garage. Beep, beep. Still going. And I'm like, honey, I've got a call at 10. I got a meeting at the office at 11. I'm sorry, I have to figure this out. She's like, well, I'm just going to call somebody. Well, you go right ahead. So she calls somebody, and he shows up, and he walks around the house. And apparently, when the guy that replaced all of the smoke detectors also installed a little thing that's now supposed to detect carbon monoxide. Mm-hmm. I didn't know about this little guy. It's identical to what the Ring doorbell thing looks like. So when I thought it was the Ring doorbell, it just happened to be upstairs. I don't go upstairs. I'm not responsible for these things, but this thing was beeping.
So you removed all 11 smoke detectors.
So the dummy taxes, it cost me hours. It cost me a fight. The dogs are now in therapy. And the good news is it was only $99 for the guy to come out to tell me that I was an idiot.
And then to reinstall all 11.
He went out to the car and said it's going to be $500 to install them back. And my wife, smart enough as she is, she's like, no, that's just dumb. My husband's going to do that for me.
More dummy tax.
Yeah. So, it actually wasn't that bad to the install on the backside. It was only like maybe 30, 40 minutes. Dummy tax. Okay? Dummy tax. So sometimes, you need to open these episodes up with just something that
there's a little bit of humbleness.
People can relate to. This is not just about dental transitions. This is about life and about all the stuff that we have to deal with as humans. A little longer story than most, but I know my listener, and I know they can relate to the dummy tax.
Everyone has been woken up in the middle of the night and just walked around and got a broom handle and just tried to whack the crap out of it. Please just stop.
Yes, yes.
I feel you on that.
Do you have any shorter version dummy tax stories that you can?
Yeah. Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Especially right now, we're redoing our house. Not all of it, just paint and some things. And we have plantation shutters on a few of our windows, but they make it really dark. And so my husband wanted to take them off. And so I'm like, fine, great. I'm all in for that. Well, one of the windows is in the bathroom. And so it has to have something on it, right? It literally looks at our neighbor's house. So he removes the plantation shutters with the thought that we're going to get those motorized blinds, right? To go up and down. It'll be so fancy. It'll be so lovely. And he removes it. We have these fake Home Depot shades up right now. The guy comes to install them and they're like, oh, we can't do one here because the window thing is too narrow. And in order to do it, we're going to have to put it over the whole, it's going to look real stupid. I'm like, I'm not doing that. It's going to look dumb. I'm not doing it. So he's like, well, I mean, I guess we can go and install plantation shutters. I'm like, oh, the ones you just took off and threw in the trash because you were so impatient? No, we are not going to reinstall plantation shutters when we just took them off because that would be more than $500. So now we're going to replace the whole glass. Like now we're going to make the glass pebbled glass or whatever so no one can see in it, when really we could have just left the plantation shutters up. So there you go. That just happened yesterday. So
we could do this every day.
Every day.
I guarantee
Every
you we
day.
could do this at least once a week. With
that'll have to be like a once every other time podcast. We'll have to share it. Okay.
Moving on.
Yeah, let's get into this. So clearly most of our podcasts are about private sales because that's kind of what, NDP, that's kind of the heart of what we do. But I think at the end of the day, one, we have an affiliate named 7 Pillars who does only DSO sales. And so I'm a part of that too. But more often than not, we get individuals who are looking to approach their transition time. And because DSO sales are so relevant right now, every private conversation has some kind of DSO question. Like, well, what do you think about this? Like, I'm not interested, but what do you think about this? Or I'm kind of trying to weigh what I'm going to do. And so I thought that like last time when we talked, I think that this conversation is so important. It's different. There's a lot of similarities, but there are different components of a DSO sale that I don't think that if, you are approaching the timeline to transition and you are considering both, right? You have to understand and have expectations of what that's going to look like for you in order to make sure that if you go down that path, you don't waste time or you don't go down the private path when that makes more sense to you, right? So just really the education around this is really important. So some of this might be a little duplicative from the last episode as far as like some of our tips, but there are definitely some differences here. So I want to start with the main question, right? Of what if my expectations, or I guess how do you even begin to set what your expectations should be in one of these types of sales?
Well, the first thing is like from a Keen Waters financial planning perspective, you want to be able to look at all your assets. So you have an asset, it's a dental practice. You've got your tax-deferred assets, taxable accounts. You've got tax-free, and you got real estate. When it comes to the asset, in this case, a dental practice, we have to look at it from both valuations. So for example, if it's a $2 million practice, we need to evaluate it if we were going to think about this transition from private owner to private practice buyer. But at the same time, we need to have that knowledge and baseline to say, look, if that client asks me a question about what the value of this on the private equity side, I need to have that answer.
Yep.
Because it's an asset of a dental practice, but there's two valuations for that. So I think the key thing is to always to understand kind of going into that and always have the mindset that let's just see what it says. I'm sorry, what was your question? I wanted to start with that.
No, I think that's fair. So, I mean, I think when I'm thinking of these conversations I'm having, right? Like, I think if you are considering a transition, and what I think you need to understand about the DSO private equity market is you need to understand the market. And I think you need to understand what the expectations are to be able to get some of these multiples, right? Because a lot of the education, quote, I'm using air quotes, of these come from hearing anecdotes from individuals who have sold and, oh, my buddy down the street, he got 10 times. We don't know 10 times what. We don't know what his practice was. We don't know what the strings were. But the expectation is that what I get, right? We don't know what that is, but we know it's a big number, right? And so that education of understanding the market and the strings that come with deals, which again, strings aren't always bad. You just got to know they're there. What is that? And I think that is a missing component here, but it's what begins to set the expectations, positive, negative, whatever they might be.
So look, I know that a lot of times how we run this podcast, you'll set me up as a great host and make me look good because that's what everyone says. Everyone always says, we realize who the smart one is in the podcast. Let me switch it up a little bit.
Okay.
And we weren't really prepared for this, but let me ask you the question.
Sure.
Okay. How would you set that expectation? Because you're the one that's going into that Keen Waters consult, visiting with that person who's already got, quote unquote, their kind of house in order. So typically what you want to be before you kind of really review these opportunities on the private equity value side is you have to have your house in order, have your financial plan, know exactly what that time frame is that you're willing to commit, kind of a clinical dentistry wise. Mm-hmm. You got to know components like the debt, the building. You have to know associates that are in that practice that are under contract. They would be fine either way if this sold. So how do you set those expectations? How do you deal with someone who's talking about a 10X when you know the reality right now in today's market, we're not getting or not seeing some type of 10 mil. So how are you setting that expectation when you're walking into that consult and saying, Christy set the stage. So what is that conversation you're having with the client?
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, it's understanding like, what is your goal, right? Like, I mean, I think that's kind of where I start any conversation is, what is your goal in this transition? What are you looking for? What is your runway and how much longer do you want to work, right? Because if I walk into a consult, and this is where expectations start to get failed. If I walk into a consult or have a phone call with a client and they say, oh, I've probably got like 2 to 3 years max. I'm ready to be done. I'm exhausted. I can't keep going at this pace any longer. Even if your practice may size-wise be a fit for a private equity sale or DSO sale, whatever we want to call them, that is not what they're looking for. They are looking for investment where the owner and the primary doctor or doctors have a little gas in them. They want to keep going. They've got 5+ years and they're looking kind of for that ongoing kind of continuation of the practice.
Let me stop you there, because how many times have you had that conversation, but they've also seen what their EBITDA is and also seen what they could get, and their response is, hey, I only want to work 2 to 3. And then when you're coming back to say, hey, you're going to need to give me at least 5 for this to work out, what percent is going to say, you know what, I'm ready to roll up the sleeves and give you another 2 to 3 because I want that number? And what percent would you say that is on the 2 to 3 and they're literally mentally 2 to 3? I don't care what the number is. I am out.
Yeah. Very few. I would say less than 10% are ready to like tack on additional years, if that. I think that most people are like, oh, okay, well, what if I only want 2 to 3 years? Can I have an associate? They try to figure out how to make that work. And what I generally say is if you're not willing to work 5 years, you're only willing to work 2 to 3 years, your value in a DSO market is going to start mirroring what your value is in a private market, right? But you're going to have to work back and you're going to have to do these things. And so I think it's one of those pieces where that expectation of how your involvement and your continuation of the practice helps drive the final value in addition to the EBITDA is really important. And I think another thing that I will do if I walk into that room is really understand what their expectation is on value, right? Because sometimes they will take their EBITDA without reducing doctor comp, right? Like they'll just take that pure profit number without paying anyone to do the work and they'll be applying that multiple there thinking that, oh, maybe it's 700, but they are going to have to be paid 300 to work back. So instead of taking 400, they're taking 700 times, whatever multiples in their head. And so I think sometimes just giving someone the facts of like, no, this is actually how it works. So that number in your head isn't even in the realm of where it would be. It's going to be somewhere in kind of this realm, helps kind of put them in a different spot to be able to kind of think about it a little more clearly versus kind of hypothetical too. So I think giving them data is also helpful.
Let me just say it this way too, is just for simple math. You got a $2.5 million practice. And again, this is a very successful practice. With an associate, it's probably making at least $1 million before I pay my associate. So we've got some type of established EBITDA and we've got some type of income that me, the owner, is making. Okay. And so I'm going to make the example of I make $700,000, my associate makes $300,000. And so that's great. And I'm going to get a value of maybe $4.5 million for this business, something like this. And so that excites me. But what you just said is I will have to take a pay cut. So I'm no longer going to be making this $700,000. Maybe that number goes down to $250,000 or $300,000. It depends on what the restorative dentistry that I'm doing. So that's what you're talking about as far as that expectation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I think understanding that oftentimes, and I'm speaking kind of from a 7 Pillars perspective, if we have a doctor who comes in who doesn't have a good financial plan, they haven't looked at their financials and their cash flow and their personal kind of outflow each month, that number still may really make sense. That number may be big and it may be enough from a price perspective. But then when they account for, okay, well, now I'm only going to make $300,000 a year and now I've got to support my lifestyle on that, right? If you are supporting your lifestyle, but you're digging into your kind of piggy bank, right, that you're supposed to last you through retirement, that's probably not a good financial position to be in, right? And there are clearly investment options and way to live off interest and kind of et cetera that, that you can have, but that's another podcast. But I think that the life after sale is also like an expectation that a lot of people don't think of that makes them disappointed when they finally get that number,
right?
Because then they put it into play. And if you're not prepared on the front end to know what you need and what's going to work, then you get excited about it and then disappointed when you actually put pen to paper and realize it doesn't work.
So your financial plan matters? Is that what you're saying?
Just, a little bit, just a little bit.
Story this morning spoke to an incredible practice, incredible mid-30s guy, driver, did $1 million last month.
Wow.
Yeah. And I asked him his vision. I asked him, where would you like to go? And, he's not really thinking about private equity or, this or that. And I just asked him a question. I said, well, in the end, this is an asset. What are you going to do with it? At some point, how do you pull the equity out? There's only one buyer. I've got 15 locations and 15 associates just going to quote unquote buy in, and they all love each other.
Yeah.
And so you have to be cautious about what you're building to know that
what your options are going to be.
And what your options are.
Yeah.
Because again, this is a stock. You can own all the stock in the world, but there's no way to cash out on it. I mean, it's not an asset. It's just something that you own. It happens to give you a check. So the asset has to give you a check, and then you got to be able to pull the equity out of it, and that's that value. So
yeah. And I think that goes into kind of another point I have, which is your practice. And I 100% agree with what you're saying, which is every person who is going to own a practice has to have a transition plan out of it, right? And if that's private, if that's a DSO, if that's unfortunately shutting your doors at the end of your thing and transferring your patient somewhere, like at some point you are going to have to move on from owning a practice. And I think that the younger people who are listening, the mid 40s who aren't close to transition, the more you educate yourself about these different options and what they look like and what your individual practice options are going to be, the better off you are going to be when that time comes.
That's right.
Because I think that oftentimes too, on the flip side, we will talk to doctors who are interested in a DSO transition and they have a small practice that has $200,000 of profit. It works for them. It's a lifestyle practice. Like they're happy with what they're making, but that is not going to give them the benefit in a DSO because there's not enough profit for it to be an investment for someone. It's a great practice for a private sale for an individual coming out to buy it and kind of own it and grow it and kind of make it their own. And so I think too, just understanding what types of practice, not even if I am a fit, but what types of practices are better fits for each of these pieces.
Yeah, I love it when you're able to meet with, call it this 30, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, and just really focus on what is it that they want. Push these practices from a growth perspective, being able to do the clinical dentistry they want to do, being able to bring associates and mentor, sure, drive profits, the ability to increase the value of the business, and then go down those roads of what options do I have, selling pieces off. Maybe I've got separate locations. I can create perhaps ownership opportunities at certain locations for key drivers there. I may set up a DSO where it's a separate operating entity. I move some money up there. I can create ownership opportunities up there for key employees, including some of my associates. So it's fun just to take the doctor's vision, direction, their clinical skills, training, and figure out where they are, push them, and kind of help execute this thing of transition.
Yeah, and just require them to think about it a little bit too, right? Like I think when we have phone calls, sometimes I will hear, it's funny, my favorite thing is when you can kind of hear someone's wheels turning and you're asking questions that maybe they haven't thought about it from that perspective, but to have to answer questions sometimes spurs the, oh, yeah, you're right. That is an idea. That is something I could do. It kind of helps them kind of process through and think about it. I would have to say, though, and I want to make sure we get to this because it is a very important point. The number one thing that causes, in my opinion, a DSO sale to not meet expectations outside of like unrealistic expectations about multiple, right, is not accounting for debt. Because right now, and I think it was post-COVID, there was a lot of free money. Money was cheap. We were expanding. We were buying. And right now, if you go through any type of sale, really, but a DSO sale in particular, you have to pay off your debt. And I think a lot of clients forget about that. And so I can't tell you the number of clients that we have moved through who have gotten to a point, they have a great deal, but you do the math on what is left over after they pay their debt. And again, debt relief is a form of income, and we all know that, but it is hard to say I sold my practice for $7 million and I got a check for $200,000.
Yep.
You know, like that is a really hard concept, and it's not enough to finish the retirement plan, to have cash flows post-close. So I think forgetting about our debt is like a huge, huge thing. So if you're listening to this, don't forget that you have to pay off your debt.
I'm telling you where this new debt comes in. It's like they've got a $2.5 million practice and they do a big finish out. Mm-hmm. That's one. $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. They get with their accountant. They do a lot of accelerated appreciation and they write it off. And then all of a sudden they get this check and they realize that they're going to have to pay ordinary income on even the assets that they sold. So you got a goodwill, you got an asset piece, and they're paying this ordinary income. And all of a sudden the tax and this, I still got to pay them the debt. It makes no sense. The second is where you've got maybe a $2 million practice and you do a startup, $700,000 expense there, and it doesn't generate any money. $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. In your mind, you're thinking, well, I've got a $2.3, $2.4 million asset, and you don't. You have a $2.3 million income practice, but you've got a massive liability on this $700,000 startup that's not generating any profit. And so you need to be very, very conscious about those projects, those reinvestment projects, because you simply don't get that money back immediately. We encourage you to invest in your practice, encourage you to expand, but those are to grow numbers. At some point, the numbers have to pay for that debt. At that point, it starts to make perfect sense.
And there's also like your mortgage. A lot of owners own their building and they have a mortgage, and the practice is cross-collateralized, or it's a guarantee, or it's an owner-occupied lease. And so if you're going to go forward and sell your practice, that debt oftentimes still has to be paid off, or the lender has to remove the practice as a guarantor, which is really challenging to do. It depends on your lender. And so I think to get to the pinnacle of a sale, private or DSO, I know we're talking about DSO today, but to get there and realize it doesn't work, or the number's not big enough, or it just isn't a fit, that sucks.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's a very emotional process to get to there. And so I think when we talk about expectations here, I think in the DSO sale in particular, price is what people go to, but I think there are so many other expectations that can be failed if we don't have the proper education and we're not in the particular place of our life and financial plan that we need to be for all the pieces to work together.
Okay. So I'm recapping here. So unrealistic expectations is an example of, I'm not going to be happy, right? That's where your buddy said you're getting a 12X, or you're reading that this Heartland group recapped at 17, so I should get 17. So unrealistic expectations is one. Two is I just did a major renovation and I have a bunch of debt. And in particular, it's probably not going to make sense if you just took out a bunch of debt. More than likely, that private equity value is not going to be as exciting as perhaps you were hoping. Three would be perhaps a big real estate project that even could be paid down. It could be a 6,000 square foot building that you love and built, and it's 14 ops, but you only have 7. And so therefore, that building is dragging down your profit, your EBITDA. And if you're trying to, because typically PE companies don't want to buy that building, they're just going to do a lease. And so now, if you want that lease dollar, then it's also going to be dragging on what that EBITDA is and that 7 or 8 multiple that perhaps you're hoping for. So is there anything else that we left out here that could cause maybe this price or maybe value to be maybe lower than expected?
No, I think in the recap, the other one would be just your inability to work, right? And to meet, a lot of these deals are going to have some kind of requirement that you either keep the practice as is or grow it over a certain amount of time. And that's a component of the deal value. And so if you are unable to work, if you're unable to agree to kind of grow, then you're not ever going to really be able to capitalize on that value. So I think that makes it lower and those expectations kind of come into play. But no, I think that you've captured it really. I think your overhead and your profitability are still driving at the end of the day, the value of this business, whether it's a DSO sale or a private sale. And so I think that, again, your focus as an owner, along with educating yourself and making sure you think about your transition plan, is continually making sure that your overhead is low and your profit is high. And if it's not, you got to figure out a way to increase your profit if you want these higher values, regardless of the type of sale.
Right. So just to illustrate this point, so you have a $5 million practice, and this is big. We've got multiple locations. This is the type of practice that would get multiple offers from a DSO. And we've got a 60% overhead in example 1 and a 50% overhead in example 2. Well, example 2 has a 10% higher margin, $500,000. You might get an 8 multiplier on this $5 million. It could be the difference of like a $4 million value. Mm-hmm. Because you have an overhead. So you mentioned it based on profit and overhead, and that impacts value 100%. So in all valuations of any business, comes down to cash flow. So if you happen to have one of these high production practice and this amazing overhead, then sure, that you're probably more of a candidate. But if it's a high top line and you're struggling with overhead, we've got some issues to resolve.
Yeah, you're going to be disappointed.
You're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Good way to say it. Yep.
And I think too, let's say you're listening and you fit in one of these buckets. Maybe you've gone down the path of a DSO sale, or you're considering one, and some of these things are sounding familiar. You have some options, right? It's not over. You have some runway, right? If you're younger or you have more runway to continue working, hiring an elite is doing what you can to reduce your cost waiting it out, right? Like if you just did an expansion, but you're kind of thinking about transition, give it time to kind of stabilize and start to see that profit. Time is one thing that you can always kind of just give yourself. If you are in a situation where you say, hey, I don't have time, like my runway is 6 years and you just told me I need 5, then you have to make a choice of, is it a lifestyle change? Is it a different way you're investing? Is it maybe looking and saying, okay, well, I wanted to be able to do X and Y in retirement and now I'm happy, I'm done. I would rather adjust that than keep working. Great. Or look at a private sale, right? And how do you make that work? I mean, if you're the multi-location practice with 15 associates, that becomes harder.
Definitely.
But if you're a single doc practice that can kind of go either way, like maybe look at that. Like any transition, there is no formula really on what makes a good transition. There are so many factors that go into why someone does this, which type of transition they choose, what makes them happy, what they're looking to solve. And I think that really thinking about that and figuring out, this isn't what I expected. How do I make it fit? And you have to be willing to give up one of the things like time, money, control. You got to figure out, what you're going to give up and how.
Yeah, I love looking at these large practices. I mean, the key is getting really good, clean financial statements, dental specific, and, setting the goals and our team and lab and supplies, setting goals in our direct costs. Typically, we're trying to set goals in our direct costs that are 40%, typically setting fixed cost goals that are around 15%. So we've got a margin in these practices. Typically in the general practice side, we're netting at least 45% before doctor. When I see practices that are higher, they're not leveraging people like Elite to drive down, like with a group purchasing organization that we utilize with them to kind of drive down, increase our margin. What other things do you see from a practice that says, they want to be ready, okay, we're going to be working on our efficiencies with Elite? What are some other things that you've seen to maybe fix those practices that need that push? What is that? Well, I'll answer my own question. Practice management, sometimes bring a consultant in, sometimes bringing somebody that can see things differently on, it could be maybe how AI is used in a practice to help diagnose and treatment plan. Maybe it could be a consultant to fix on hygiene. It could be a consultant that can convert over some of the insurance plans to fee for service. It could be on marketing and new patients. It could be on focusing on clinical skills. So sometimes just having that consultant to take that step back and to look at things and strategize. I often tell the story of MB2 and why they are so wildly successful. I think they have the ability as a company to really look back and to see inside those practices and to try to figure out what that key dynamic is that's working or not working and work with those doctors to fix that. And I think every DSO private equity group would try to strive to that level. And I'm not promoting MB2, I'm not promoting selling MB2. I think it's a world-class group. And I say that because we work with some of those doctors and they say really kind things about them. We get to hear the other sides when people practice or maybe partner with other people and they're not as excited. So I like to learn from that. I like to see it's not just, hey, just go down that route, but what are they doing specifically to help their clients be more successful? What can we learn as an organization here at Kane Waters and Seven Pillars and NDP to learn from that, to be able to be an advisor similar to what they do to really grow the practice top line and grow the efficiency?
Yeah, I think you have to be self-reflective and ask the right questions and have the right people in your team to figure out what you want. And I think sometimes in a transition, these DSO groups do allow you to excel at what you're good at and let them excel at what you're not good at. And so I agree with the management consultants and practice management if they're fulfilling the right need and they're coming in to do the right thing at the right time versus just, I don't know what's wrong, just let me hire people to figure, because then all that you're doing is increasing your overhead without kind of any top line or bottom line impact.
Yeah, I think in the end, is kind of summarized here. As you own this asset, we talked about it's an asset, it's a dental practice. What is its value? What is its worth? And how are you going to effectively pull the equity out, either through a private practice sale or private equity sale? There's lots of options for you. We talked about some of the hurdles that you may have when your expectations are not met, or maybe some big investments that you may have made in the practice, but really getting your house in order before you kind of go down these roads and even exploring it. And then we also talked about just knowing that regardless of which transition path you choose, you have to self-reflect and just say, I want to be better. We meet as a team and we're constantly looking at how to improve our practice valuations, our team. We look at our weaknesses and really try to self-reflect there and say, hey, this is an area that we can improve upon. I think that we've done a great job of looking out into the future, how we can continue to market and grow and help other people. And I'd like to close here with the self-reflection that I am no longer allowed to be in charge of smoke detectors or anything with regards to self-improvement of my house. Okay, because I have a skill set. There's very little of these skill sets that I have.
Find an expert to help you with the things you're not good at, Charles. That's what we're doing here, you know?
Google, how do I solve my problem immediately? If you're trying to solve your problem, Google transitions. Hopefully we pop up, to help you with your transitions.
All right, team. That's all we have for today. I'll again just repeat. Education, expectations, and self-reflection. I've yet to meet someone who is self-reflecting continuously and who is educated, who didn't have the right expectations. So I think those are three things critical as you're looking to a transition. So thanks for joining us today on episode 135 of Transition Talk. As always, make sure to share the transition love with those who may not know of us yet and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time.
See you guys.